Good morning, folks. With us today is Matt Manocherian. He is an author of the new book, the SIS Football Rookie Handbook 2019 paperback edition. So, Matt, what is Sports Info Solutions?
Hey, thanks for having me on. So Sports Info Solutions is a company. We were actually originally founded as Info Solutions in 2002 by John DeWan and Bill James. So John DeWan had originally founded Stats Inc., sold it around a few years before then, but wanted to go deeper in depth on baseball. And along with his good friend Bill James of Moneyball fame, they built up this company that works with almost every major league team. And in 2015, they expanded into Sports Info Solutions, started covering professional football, and since then we've added on college football as well. And my background was as a scout. I worked for 5 years with both the New Orleans Saints and the Cleveland Browns. And I had learned something about analytics after I left the Browns and was interested and eventually got hooked up with this company. And I look at myself as a translator between the old school scouts and kind of the new school analytics. And this book right here, the SIS Football Rookie Handbook, is really the best of both worlds in terms of giving you the scouting and the analytic breakdown of all the top players in the draft.
Oh, wow. That sounds remarkable. I mean, going through it, picking out, the different players, different positions that I was interested in finding out more about. And you're right, it was very inclusive. It was very helpful to kind of get an idea of what to expect with the upcoming draft. Now, of course, we were wanting to know your background in it. You mentioned about being a scout, but prior to that, did you play?
So I grew up playing football. I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, playing football, and I was a decent enough high school football player, but was not a Division I type athlete. So I actually went to Duke University for my undergrad, even though I argued with my parents for a while that I wanted to play D3 football. But ended up at Duke, wasn't fit to play there. Worked for the team a little bit, kind of on and off. But that was a rough time for Duke football before Coach Cutcliffe was in. And when I graduated, I went right back and I started coaching high school football. So I went back to my old high school coach, asked him for a job. He said, heck, I let you call the defense on the field when you were in high school. I'll let you come coach the kids now. He put me in charge of the secondary and the wide receivers, and I did day jobs to pay the bills, but did that for 2 years, and then I got my first opportunity just pushing and pushing and pushing through a friend of a friend of a friend, landed an internship with the New Orleans Saints, and that's how I got in. So I got an internship, and I worked my way into a job there, and that's how I got my start.
Oh, wow, that is remarkable. I mean, shoot, to go through those experiences, to be able to understand the game of football on that type of level, that is remarkable. So it sounds like you got a lot of insight with this. With this book, did you have other people contribute?
Oh yeah, this is far from my book. I'm the editor. They threw my name on the cover, but this book is Sports Info Solutions. So this is a combination of a lot of effort from a lot of people. We have over 50 video scouts that chart every NFL and college football game for all kinds of advanced data points. This is what we sell to the teams. This is where we're gathering this advanced data. We're conducting analysis on it. That's what our research and development team does. We've got an awesome IT staff that constructs all of the software that we use to gather this stuff. I mean, it runs the gamut. So this book is a collective by a lot of people. I'm flattered that they threw my name on the cover, but John Todd and Nate Cooper, our excellent scouts, Brian Reef, who worked on a lot of the actual structure of the book. This is much bigger than one man's project.
And the way I understand it, there were over 250 players that are broken down in this book?
Yeah, actually, we wrote up reports on over 400 players. And of course, the beautiful thing about analytics is we have analytical profiles on every college football player because that's what analytics is. We watch every play of every game. We have at least 4 scouts recording information on all of it. So we get a lot of really good stuff. So we wrote up over 400 of the scouting reports. Only 253 of them made the book. The book's already 600 pages, that is. And that's because of all those 250 people, you flip to any page in the book. So I'm randomly just holding my book in my hands right now, but I look up our defensive tackle rankings. Our 14th ranked defensive tackle is DeMarcus Christmas from Florida State. On the left side of the page, I see his scouting breakdown, an NFL-style scouting report based on what I did when I was with the Saints and when I was with the Browns under Mike Lombardi. And we see what Christmas is. We see he's an explosive guy who gets into the backfield, needs some polish, quality rotational player, can be a 1 or a 3 technique. All right, so we're looking at more of a 4-3 scheme type guy. Meanwhile, I can look over on the right side of the page and I can see the advanced analytics on this player. So I can see that he only gets a pressure 2.9% of the time. So not a really high pressure rate, what we're looking at from this guy. He's almost always lined up in a defensive tackle position as opposed to a nose tackle or an end position when he lines up. He fared pretty well when he was run at. He's only run at 14% of the time when he's in the game, and he has a 41% positive play rate in those situations. So those are good numbers that we looked at. All this kind of stuff kind of adds up the whole profile of the player, and we make you the GM. As the owner of the book, I mean, you have all this information that you would get in front of you, and you can decide for yourself.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like it's very inclusive, just all the amount of information that one's going to have to be able to truly feel like they're in the draft room.
Yeah, you can be a real expert with this. And this is the same thing. I was really happy to put together this book with the company because when we show up in Indianapolis for the combine last week, we're having meetings with all the NFL teams, telling them what we've been up to in the last year, what sort of new data we're recording, what sort of new analysis we're conducting, the different research tools that we have available to them. And to show up for these meetings with the book in hand ahead of the combine, showing all the work that we've been able to do to really get to know this rookie class, I think it puts us in a whole different light with the teams. And we saw a lot of them watching the combine drills and learning about these players with their SIS rookie football handbook in hand. Because, this is the real information that can help get you caught up. If you weren't the scout that was on the road the whole year and you're the coach just trying to get to know these players, this is a great place to start.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like you all have relationships with all the different teams?
Not all the different teams, but we have a relationship of some sort with most of the teams, and specifically partnering up with a handful of them.
Excellent. And you mentioned, of course, being up at the NFL Combine. That was, is it still up in Indianapolis?
Yep. Every year in Indianapolis, just finished up on Monday.
Oh, wow. So what's that type of event like?
Excuse me? You said
what's the event like? I mean, how overwhelming is something? And obviously, you're up there for business purposes, so it's probably not as much fun as it could be. But I can imagine something like that is quite overwhelming.
Well, this is about my 10th combine, going back to my scouting years. So as we like to say, this ain't my first rodeo.
Nice.
But the combine's great. Your first combine, I think, as a scout, anybody who goes to the combine your first time, I think it's really exciting. It's really interesting. I think after you've been to one combine, you've kind of been to them all in terms of the on-field stuff. I really don't get much of a kick out of watching guys run and walk around in their underwear and all this kind of stuff. For me, it's, send me the results when you're done. And whether as a scout, as an analyst, everybody uses the numbers a little bit differently. I think most people probably overuse them a little bit on both sides of that equation. But really, send me the numbers when we're done. And I'm not really, as a scout, I'm not needing to watch all this. I get it if you're a coach and you're not on the road all year, you're busy coaching your players up, and you're trying to get to see all the players at once. It's convenient in that sense. And, you can wrap your head around them. But for the most part, I think the combine's probably better on TV than it is in person. Now, what I will separate is kind of everything that goes along with the combine. And that is, it's the NFL convention every year of sorts. Baseball has their winter meetings. Basketball has their summer league. This is kind of the NFL's off-season convention where you get all the coaches, all the scouts together, see a lot of old friends, catch up with people. There's all kinds of networking going on. And Indianapolis is a walking city. So everything is in walking distance there. And in fact, it's February, but everything is tunneled. You can walk through skywalks and different things entirely indoors throughout Indianapolis, from Lucas Oil Stadium through the Convention Center to the JW Marriott to the city center. All of that stuff is connected. So it's a great city for this sort of event, and all of that other stuff that comes along with it, the reunions and seeing everybody, that stuff's really fun. And yeah, we have a lot of team meetings, but as you can tell, this stuff's not so horrible to talk about all day.
Exactly. So obviously the NFL Combine plays a role. How about the Pro Day? How much of a role does that play into the drafting process?
Pro Day is more secondary to the Combine. So the Combine is great because you can see the guys all side by side, like for like, on the same field surface with the laser timers. But a Pro Day is just kind of a miniature version of that. So you're going to go deeper on each roster. You're going to get to see, the full depth of the draft eligible players at any school, and maybe even from some nearby schools that are coming around, depending on what the situation is. So the breadth of players that you're evaluating grows. But in terms of, I'd rather have just Combine numbers than Pro Day numbers. If you could choose one or the other for any players, once you get the Combine numbers, unless you see something where there's a drastic difference, somebody was injured, and all of a sudden, these sorts of things. But otherwise, we did a workout. We're kind of good on this. Let's get back to the film.
Speaking of that, how important are injuries to factor into where you want to draft a player? I mean, it should be a major thing, or should it just depend on the individual injury?
So in the SIS Football Rookie Handbook, we actually had our injury expert, John Veros, come through and tag players based on their injury history. So we're keeping track of all these guys' injury histories throughout the time that they're going through college. And there are two different designations that we use for injuries. There was current injuries and there was long-term injury flags. And a current injury is something like, okay, you were injured this year, maybe you weren't ready to run at the Combine, something like that. But this is not something that's going to be a big issue. This is something that doesn't seem to indicate that it's going to be something that causes re-injury or recurrence in the future. Meanwhile, the injury flags would be something that's more, okay, degenerative, something that has a high probability of coming back and recurring, things like that. So we have these two different flags, and obviously the current injury flag is really a non-issue for drafting somebody. The long-term injury flag is a much bigger issue, and then that's something that every team is going to be taking into account. And yes, the Combine exists first and foremost to get all the injury information on these players. That's the number one reason why it occurs every year. And the trainers play a big role, maybe too big a role, in saying their piece on the draft board, who they're comfortable with and who they aren't. There are times where you have players that you'll love all fall, and then you'll find out they have no cartilage in their knee at age 22, and your trainers will tell you, sorry, we got to take them off the board. And then those are tough conversations.
Ooh, that definitely sounds like it. I mean, like you said, you've spent the time, you've done the research, and you feel like they're a top-notch player, but unfortunately, because of the risk versus the reward, I know what you mean there. So where is the depth in the draft this year?
So in the first round, we see a lot of defensive talent, especially up front on the defensive side. Really good high-end talent there. Less high-end talent on the offensive side of the ball. But then throughout the draft, I think we see pretty good depth throughout. Again, it starts on the defense, really good depth, really throughout the defensive positions in the draft. Seeing a lot of those big guys up front again. Strength of the draft, but you also see some depth in the offensive line, and I think every year you find that there's depth at receiver and running back because these guys are available.
Exactly. I know what you mean. There's just so many. I mean, every team has got a star running back on it, so you would think there's going to be a good number of them available to go to the NFL. Now, the question is, of course, which one's going to take that next step? Which one's going to be the breakout player with that? What position do you feel has the most value to it because it is harder to find?
Well, quarterback has the most value. It's the most important position in football, I think, hands down. And then outside of that, the more position scarce, the scarcer positions to find players. You talk about offensive tackles, pass rushers, and corners are generally the ones that it's really tough to find those real special difference makers.
So speaking of that, how do you feel the quarterbacks are this year?
So for us, we think Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins are very different players, but they're neck and neck at the top of our ratings, despite the fact that each of them has only played 1 year really of starting experience. We like those guys the best. Then we got a pretty good drop off into kind of low end circumstantial starter to backup level grades for the kind of that next tier of quarterbacks there. So we don't see these guys as high end as the Baker Mayfields of last year, but we see these guys as solid starter type candidates when you look at a Haskins and a Murray. I think at least one of these guys probably pans out as being a solid starting quarterback. But they both definitely have their red flags to them, different ways for each of the different players. After that, there's a bit of a drop off when you get to the rest of the QBs.
Yeah, what do you think about your alma mater, Locke?
Sorry, you're asking about Daniel Jones?
No, oh, my bad. I was thinking Locke was from Duke. I must have got the wrong one.
Yeah, Drew Lock and Daniel Jones, I'll throw them both into the same category. I've watched more Daniel Jones because I was a Duke alum. But both of these guys, we've seen a lot of tape of them. They've played a lot of football. They put a lot on film. We don't have to worry about them not having started enough games like we do Murray and Haskins. What we do have to worry about is that the film hasn't been very consistently good. Both of these guys have shown inconsistent accuracy throughout their careers. And if there's one thing we look for in accuracy, we see both these guys, there are questions about their game. There are inconsistencies to them. And as much film as they've shown, I don't think that I've ever felt very confident that these guys can put the team on their back and win games at the college level, the way a Kyler Murray really has shown us that he's able to do.
Yeah, any concerns with his baseball background? Do you think, that the teams are kind of iffy because of that, or do you think they have a lot of confidence in just his on-field talent?
In terms of his baseball, are the teams worried that he's going to go to
he's going to leave and go play baseball instead?
Right. I think that was a concern. I think a lot of the year people thought that was how it was going to go. And then as people realized just what type of a football player he was and some of the traits that he showed out there, the kind of arm that he has, the kind of athleticism that he has, I think people really started to realize, this is a guy that we have a statistic called expected points added. There are only 3 quarterbacks in the country that have over 100 expected points added. And Kyler Murray has over 237. So, it's just absolutely crazy how much of an outlier he's been in terms of his production. The production on the field this year is just really, really outrageous. And that's what stands out with him. So as that's come to pass, I think, I work with a lot of baseball guys here at Sports Info Solutions, and he's 3 years away from being a major leaguer, most likely, if he ever makes it. He was a top 10 player in the baseball draft, but that's not like being a top 10 player in football. It's kind of a little bit more of a risky thing, a risky proposition in baseball. You're further away. He'd be several years away from getting a real payday, aside from the initial signing bonus, which would pale in comparison to the initial guaranteed money it looks like he's going to get being a first-round pick and potentially the first player off the board. So in terms of short-term money, long-term money, off-the-field money, and plus, there are only 32 NFL starting quarterbacks. If he can become a real high-level starting quarterback, which he's closer to becoming a high-level starter quarterback today than he is a high-level center fielder or whatever, I think that he's actually making a rare decision that's good in terms of going football over baseball. I think it's a rare situation, but the kind of between him being a quarterback and being more ready to go right now on that stage, I think it's actually created a situation where it actually. Meanwhile, he seems to like football better too. So I think
that's important. Yeah,
I think all these things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It just, when they started talking about it, my first thought was Charlie Ward back in the day with basketball, where, he won the Heisman, and he still ended up going and playing basketball, which just seemed odd.
Yeah, super interesting. I don't think he was I think he was drafted in football, but not as highly.
Oh, yeah, not as high as this, yeah.
Yeah. So definitely interesting there, and Tebow comparisons, and so it's there's definitely a reason why you get the media frenzy.
Excellent. So you mentioned you had meetings with different teams. What about the Bengals? What are they saying?
What are the Bengals saying? The Bengals are doing some intelligent things. They are thinking about things progressively. Obviously, we can't get into the nitty gritty of the conversation, and we're not even discussing with them things like specific players or anything like that. But they're doing a lot of different things to try to take in. There's a lot of data and information coming at NFL teams, and they're doing a really good job of synthesizing what really matters. So I think that's what kind of I took away from our meetings with them.
Oh, that's phenomenal. That's what I do like to hear as a fan. Yeah, I wasn't expecting, because I know with all the trade secrets and all, can't go into detail about players, but it is good to hear that they're doing the right things to select those players. And it is shown with some of their draft choices over the last couple of years that they've done an excellent job with that. Now, of course, with quarterbacks being so important, the other two positions I think are really huge nowadays are, of course, you mentioned the linemen that are protecting the quarterbacks, and then the defensive ends and the edge rushers that are trying to destroy the quarterbacks. So, of course, I see with the draft, most people are saying that it's going to be Nick Bosa and Josh Allen pretty high up there going after those quarterbacks.
Yep, those are two of our top guys. There's actually one guy that we have rated above those guys, and that's Quinnen Williams out of Alabama. He's just a ridiculous, explosive 300-pounder, scheme versatile, good in the pass game, good in the run game. Came really out of nowhere this year to run away with the top spot on our draft board from Sports Info Solutions. So look out for him. I mean, at the combine, he ran a 4.8 40-yard dash at 300 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, he's just the sort of athlete that you don't really see.
Exactly.
Just rare traits. Yeah, he's the guy for us that he even came out above Bosa, who I think you're right is a lot of people's consensus number one. And then also look out for Josh Allen and Montez Sweat, another guy who ran 4.41 at 250 pounds. So I mean, just crazy athleticism coming out.
So yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of talent, like you said. The depth, the value is going to be there in the defensive line, and then of course offensive line. You have several that are really. Out of Florida, you've got an offensive lineman, and what was the other one that was really big?
Hey, I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry.
I'm having.
So, what were some of the offensive linemen that you were saying were going to be on the higher end?
The offensive linemen in the draft, I don't think there's as much like high end talent in this one. I do think that there's some good depth kind of coming out and some guys that are worthy of first and second round consideration. Thinking off the top of my head, there are a few of the guys out of Oklahoma that are pretty good. Cody Ford comes to mind. Two other guys at tackle, and these guys could be tackles, could be guards. Greg Little, Jonah Williams, and throwing Andre Dillard into that conversation as well. Andre Dillard showed out at the combine, did a really nice job out there. It was really impressive stuff. Moving inside, we like Garrett Bradbury at center. We think he's probably the top center in the draft. Dalton Risner, somebody else to keep an eye on at that position. And then in terms of guards, if you're looking at the guards in there, a position of growing importance, we had four guys actually tied for our top grade in there. Probably, lower first round type talent, maybe second round type talent, but Michael Dieter, Nate Davis, Chris Lindstrom, and Bo Benchwowell. Those are the guys that we liked inside there.
Excellent. So it sounds like you got everything locked up pretty much for this year. When do you start working on the next edition of the book? Do you do spring ball or do you wait till the regular season starts?
So we're constantly doing work on all of these guys. And one thing that's nice about the way that we organize things is we don't just evaluate this year's draft class. We evaluate every player in college football. We're working with NFL and college football teams. So in terms of putting together the book, we have a framework for a book now that includes scouting reports and analytics, and we're going to keep improving on that framework every year. But for the most part, the blueprint is kind of set. And outside of that, all we've got to do is go through our analytic process that we go through, charting every game and continuing with our research and development. And then on the scouting report side, myself and my scouting lieutenants, Nate Cooper and John Todd, we will be refining our process and making sure that just like NFL teams that go through their process, we make our process better every year, make sure we're on the same page in terms of our grading systems and all that kind of stuff, and then delegate out the reports, teach the guys what we're looking for, and then go grind the tape.
Sounds great, Matt. Before we let you go, where on social media and the web can fans find out more about you?
Yes, well, check out the SIS Football Rookie Handbook. It's available at actasports.com. That's ACTA sports.com. It's also available on Amazon. And then in terms of finding me, finding Sports Info Solutions, you can catch us on Twitter. I'm at Matt Mano, at MATTMANO, and Solutions is at sportsinfo_SIS. Our guys there are constantly tweeting a lot of really awesome stats, both football and baseball, interesting stuff, interesting new ways of looking at the game. So be sure to check that out.
Sounds great. Thank you for joining us today, Matt.
Thanks for having me.